Rachel Morrison's hands were shaking as she packed her suitcase for what should have been the happiest trip of her life. It was January 2019, and the 38-year-old elementary school teacher from Portland, Oregon, was preparing for her honeymoon in Costa Rica with her new husband, Derek Morrison. She carefully folded the white linen dress she planned to wear for their beachside dinner, tucked her favorite sandals into the side pocket, and placed her prescription medication in a clear Ziploc bag, as required for airport security. She held up her grandmother's emerald ring, the one that had been passed down through 3 generations of women in her family, admiring how it caught the light before slipping it onto her finger. She packed her wedding band from her first marriage to Michael, keeping it in a small velvet pouch because even though she had remarried, she couldn't quite let go of the symbol of the love she had shared with him for 15 years. What Rachel didn't know was that she would never unpack that suitcase. She would never wear that white dress. She would never return to the 2-bedroom apartment she shared with her 12-year-old daughter Emma. And when her new husband came back from Costa Rica 3 weeks later, he would be wearing her grandmother's emerald ring on a chain around his neck, her wedding band from Michael on his pinky finger, and several other pieces of her jewelry that should have been buried with her or passed down to Emma. This is the story of how a devoted mother, a beloved teacher, and a woman who thought she had found love again after tragedy became the victim of one of the most calculated and cold-blooded murder schemes in recent American history. This is the story of a predator who didn't hunt strangers online from foreign countries, but who infiltrated American communities, befriended neighbors, attended church services, coached Little League, volunteered at food banks, and killed not once, not twice, but at least 7 times over 15 years. This is the story of the man who was never really Derek Morrison at all, whose real identity would shock everyone who thought they knew him, whose true nature was hidden behind a mask of kindness and normalcy, so convincing that even experienced investigators would later admit they might have been fooled if they had met him under different circumstances. This is the story of how an elementary school teacher's death would expose a serial killer who had perfected the art of becoming invisible by being the most visible member of every community he entered. Rachel Morrison had not been looking for love when Derek entered her life in September 2018. She had been a widow for 3 years, ever since her husband Michael died suddenly from an undiagnosed heart condition at age 39. Michael's death had devastated Rachel and their daughter Emma, who was only 9 years old at the time. Rachel remembered the day with painful clarity. Michael had been playing basketball with friends on a Saturday morning, something he did most weekends to stay in shape and maintain friendships from college. He had come home complaining of heartburn, saying he probably ate too much at the post-game brunch, promising to take it easy for the rest of the day. Rachel had been grading papers at the kitchen table while Emma watched cartoons in the living room. Michael went upstairs to take a shower. 20 minutes later, when Rachel went to check on him, she found him collapsed on the bathroom floor, already gone. The paramedics said he had died instantly from a massive heart attack caused by an undetected congenital heart defect. He was 39 years old, healthy and active, with no warning signs that anything was wrong. The grief that followed Michael's death had been overwhelming. Rachel had spent the first year in a fog, going through the motions of daily life while feeling completely disconnected from everything around her. She got Emma to school, went to work, came home, made dinner, helped with homework, put Emma to bed, and then sat alone in the living room, staring at the television without really seeing what was on the screen. She slept in the guest room because she couldn't bear to sleep in the bed she had shared with Michael. She kept his clothes in the closet, his toothbrush in the bathroom, his favorite coffee mug in the cabinet. Friends and family encouraged her to see a therapist, to join a grief support group, to do something besides just surviving. But Rachel couldn't imagine moving forward, when moving forward meant accepting that Michael was really gone. By the 2nd year after Michael's death, Rachel had learned to function more normally. She returned to sleeping in her own bedroom, though she still kept Michael's pillow on his side of the bed. She donated most of his clothes to charity, keeping only a few favorite shirts and his winter coat. She took off her wedding ring and put it in her jewelry box, though she looked at it every morning and sometimes slipped it back on when she was home alone. She started accepting invitations to have coffee with friends, attending Emma's school events without crying in the parking lot afterward, and occasionally laughing at jokes without immediately feeling guilty for experiencing joy. She was learning to live with the loss rather than being consumed by it. For 3 years, Rachel focused entirely on 2 things: being the best mother she could be to Emma, and being the best 3rd grade teacher at Lincoln Elementary School, where she had worked for 12 years. Her colleagues described her as someone who brought homemade cookies for every staff meeting, who stayed late to tutor struggling students without being asked, who decorated her classroom with elaborate seasonal themes that made her students excited to come to school, and who never forgot a birthday or anniversary. She was the teacher parents requested for their children, the one students remembered decades later as the person who made them feel valued and capable. She was known for writing personalized notes to each student on the last day of school, for creating individualized learning plans without being required to do so, for spending her own money on books and supplies when the school budget fell short. Teaching had become her therapy, a way to channel her grief into something productive and meaningful. Her neighbors in the quiet suburban Portland neighborhood knew her as the woman who watered their plants when they went on vacation, who organized the annual block party every August, who always had her Christmas lights up before Thanksgiving, and who could be counted on to help with anything from jump-starting a dead car battery to watching someone's kids in an emergency. She was the person who noticed when someone hadn't brought in their mail for a few days and checked to make sure they were okay. She was the one who baked casseroles when neighbors had new babies or were recovering from surgery. She was woven into the fabric of the community in a way that made her absence unthinkable, which is perhaps why what eventually happened to her seemed so impossible to everyone who knew her. Rachel's life had become stable, predictable, and profoundly lonely. She went to work, came home to help Emma with homework, made dinner, watched television, and went to bed. On weekends, she drove Emma to soccer practice, did laundry, cleaned the house, graded papers, and occasionally met her sister Jennifer for lunch at the small cafe downtown where they had been going since they were children. She had no interest in dating apps, which she viewed with suspicion and fear after reading news stories about women who met dangerous men online. She had no desire to meet men in bars, which felt inappropriate for a widowed mother and elementary school teacher. She politely declined when well-meaning friends tried to set her up on blind dates, explaining that she wasn't ready, that it felt like a betrayal of Michael's memory, that she couldn't imagine loving anyone the way she had loved him. Her heart still belonged to Michael, even 3 years after his death. She still wore her wedding ring on a chain around her neck, hidden under her clothes where students and colleagues couldn't see it, but where she could feel it against her skin. She still kept his favorite coffee mug on the shelf, even though no one used it. She still set the table for 3 people occasionally before catching herself and removing the extra plate. She still found herself turning to tell Michael something funny that happened at school before remembering he wasn't there. The grief had become quieter over time, less like drowning and more like carrying a heavy weight, but it was always present, shaping every moment of every day. It was in this state of quiet grief and careful routine that Rachel met Derek Morrison in September 2018 at a community fundraiser for the local food bank. Rachel had volunteered to help organize the event, as she did every year. The fundraiser was one of the biggest community events in their suburban Portland neighborhood, bringing together local businesses, schools, churches, and residents to raise money for families struggling with food insecurity. Rachel's role was to coordinate volunteer schedules, set up donation tables, and manage the registration area. She had arrived at the community center parking lot at 7 in the morning, 2 hours before the event was scheduled to begin, to start setting up folding tables and arranging signage. She was wrestling with a particularly stubborn table that refused to unfold properly when a man approached and offered to help. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with sandy brown hair going grey at the temples, warm hazel eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He was dressed casually in khaki pants, a blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and well-worn running shoes. He looked to be in his mid-40s, with the kind of face that could belong to a teacher, an accountant, a neighbor, anyone you might see at the grocery store or the post office without giving them a second thought. He looked, Rachel thought, like a normal person, a good person. He introduced himself as Derek Morrison, new to Portland, recently moved from Sacramento for work, trying to get involved in the community and learn about local organizations that needed volunteers. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, his eye contact steady but not intense, his demeanor friendly but respectful of boundaries. He asked if he could help with setup, explaining that he had the morning free and figured the best way to learn about a community was to participate in events like this. Rachel, who had been expecting to set up mostly alone since other volunteers weren't scheduled to arrive for another hour, gratefully accepted his help. Over the next 3 hours setting up for the fundraiser, Rachel and Derek talked about ordinary things while arranging tables, hanging banners, organizing donation boxes, and setting up the registration area. He mentioned he worked in commercial real estate, helping businesses find and evaluate potential locations for expansion. He explained that he had spent 20 years with a firm in Sacramento before being offered a position with a Portland-based company that focused on sustainable development projects. He talked about how he had been looking for a change after his divorce was finalized earlier in the year, how the move to Portland felt like an opportunity for a fresh start in a city he had always admired. He mentioned that he had a daughter in college at UC Berkeley who was studying environmental science, that he was proud of her even though he wished they talked more often, that one of the challenges of divorce was maintaining relationships with adult children who had their own busy lives. As Rachel found herself sharing more than she usually did with strangers. She talked about being a teacher at Lincoln Elementary, about how much she loved working with third graders who were old enough to read chapter books, but young enough to still think teachers knew everything. She mentioned that she had a daughter in middle school, that Emma was a great kid who played soccer and loved science, that being a single parent was harder than she had expected, but also more rewarding. She talked about how she had lost her husband 3 years ago, keeping the details brief because she had learned that people became uncomfortable when you talked too much about death, especially sudden death of young people. Derek listened without interrupting, nodding with what seemed like genuine understanding, and when he responded, he didn't offer empty platitudes or try to change the subject. He simply said that losing someone you loved changed you in ways that people who hadn't experienced it could never fully understand, that there was no timeline for grief, that moving forward didn't mean forgetting. The conversation was easy, comfortable, the kind of talk between two people who have both experienced loss and learned to carry it quietly without making it the center of every interaction. They discussed Portland's neighborhoods, comparing notes on the best coffee shops and hiking trails. They talked about their daughters, sharing the universal parental experience of watching children grow up faster than seemed possible. They discussed books they had read recently, discovering they both liked historical fiction and biographies. They talked about community involvement, with Derek asking thoughtful questions about local organizations, and Rachel explaining the various volunteer opportunities she participated in throughout the year. When the setup was finished and other volunteers started arriving, Derek thanked Rachel for letting him help and mentioned he hoped to see her at the actual fundraiser the following weekend. Rachel didn't think much about Derek Morrison until the fundraiser itself on Saturday afternoon, when he showed up early and immediately found her in the crowd. He was wearing jeans and a Portland Trail Blazers t-shirt, carrying a large box of donuts from the local bakery that he said he thought the volunteers might enjoy since they had been working so hard. The gesture was thoughtful without being excessive, practical without being showy. He stayed for the entire 4-hour event, helping wherever needed, carrying boxes for elderly volunteers, entertaining children in the kids' activity area when parents were busy, manning the donation table during shift changes, never asking for recognition or praise, just being useful in the way that truly helpful people are. Rachel found herself noticing him throughout the afternoon, impressed by how naturally he seemed to fit into the community event, how he talked to people of all ages with the same genuine interest, how he helped without being asked, and without making a show of his helpfulness. When the event ended and volunteers were cleaning up, Derek was among the last to leave, helping fold chairs, break down tables, sweep the parking lot, and load everything into the storage unit. As Rachel was getting into her car to leave, exhausted but satisfied that the fundraiser had raised almost $15,000 for the food bank, Derek approached and asked if she might be interested in getting coffee sometime. "Just coffee," he said. "No pressure, no expectations. Just two people who seem to enjoy talking to each other and might want to continue that conversation outside of a community center parking lot." He made it clear that he understood if she wasn't interested, that he wouldn't be offended or make things awkward if she preferred to keep their interactions limited to volunteer events. Rachel hesitated. She hadn't been on anything resembling a date since Michael died 3 years ago. The thought of sitting across from a man who wasn't Michael, making small talk, wondering if he was interested in her romantically or just as a friend, trying to figure out the rules of dating in her late 30s, felt overwhelming and slightly terrifying. But there was something about Derek that felt safe. He wasn't trying too hard. He wasn't being overly flirtatious. He wasn't making grand gestures or putting pressure on her. He was just asking to have coffee with another adult human being who might enjoy conversation. She heard herself saying yes before she fully decided to, giving him her phone number, agreeing to meet at a small cafe near her school the following Saturday morning. Their first coffee date was at Riverside Cafe, a small locally owned shop near Rachel's school that she had been going to for years. They met on a Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, and what was supposed to be an hour conversation turned into 3 hours of talk that felt effortless and natural. Derek arrived exactly on time, not early enough to seem too eager or late enough to seem disrespectful. He insisted on buying Rachel's coffee, a vanilla latte with an extra shot, but didn't make a show of paying or act like she now owed him something in return. They sat at a corner table by the window, and the conversation picked up where it had left off at the fundraiser. Derek talked about his work in commercial real estate, explaining how he helped businesses evaluate locations based on factors like foot traffic, demographics, zoning regulations, and growth potential. He made what could have been a boring topic interesting by sharing stories about unusual projects he had worked on. A bookstore that wanted to open in an old fire station, a restaurant that needed to find a location with specific kitchen requirements, a non-profit that needed space for both offices and community programs. He talked about growing up in Northern California, about his parents who had both passed away in the last decade from cancer, about how losing them had made him realize how short life was and how important it was to spend time on things that mattered. He talked about his divorce, which he described as sad but amicable. Two people who had grown apart over 20 years and finally admitted they wanted different things from life. He talked about his daughter Jessica, sharing stories that showed pride without bragging, concern without being overbearing, love without being possessive. He asked Rachel about teaching, genuinely curious about what it was like to work with young children, what the biggest challenges were, what kept her motivated after 12 years in the same school. He asked about Emma, about what it was like to raise a daughter alone, about how Emma had handled her father's death, about what activities Emma enjoyed, and what Rachel's hopes were for her future. He asked about her interests outside of work and parenting, seeming genuinely interested when Rachel talked about her love of hiking, her attempts to learn watercolor painting, her goal of reading 50 books a year. When Rachel talked about Michael, Derek listened without trying to change the subject or offer advice. He nodded sympathetically when she described the shock of sudden loss, the challenge of explaining death to a 9-year-old, the loneliness of being widowed in her mid-30s. He shared that his mother's death from cancer had taught him that grief didn't follow a schedule, that everyone processed loss differently, that there was no right or wrong way to move forward. Over the next 2 months, Rachel and Derek saw each other regularly, always in public places, always during daytime hours, always casual and unhurried. They met for coffee every Saturday morning at Riverside Cafe, establishing a routine that became the highlight of Rachel's week. They went for walks in Washington Park, following the trails through the Japanese garden and the rose garden, talking about everything and nothing, enjoying the October colors as leaves changed from green to brilliant reds and oranges. They attended a production of Our Town at the community theater, sitting in the back row and discussing the play afterward over dessert at a local diner. They grabbed lunch at the food truck pods downtown, trying different cuisines and rating each one, creating a running list of favorites. They visited Powell's books, spending hours browsing different sections and recommending titles to each other. Derek was unfailingly polite to waitstaff, always saying please and thank you, tipping generously but not ostentatiously, treating everyone he encountered with the same respect, regardless of their position or status. He always insisted on paying for dates, but never made a big show of it, or acted like Rachel owed him anything in return. He remembered details from previous conversations, asking follow-up questions about things Rachel had mentioned weeks earlier, demonstrating that he actually listened instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. He never pressured Rachel for anything more than companionship, never suggested they go back to his apartment, never tried to kiss her or hold her hand, never made her feel like his interest in her was purely physical or transactional. In early November, Rachel mentioned that Emma's school was having a fall festival with games, food, and activities for families. Derek asked if it would be appropriate for him to attend, making it clear that he didn't want to overstep boundaries or make Emma uncomfortable by showing up uninvited to her school event. Rachel appreciated the thoughtfulness and said Emma would probably enjoy having another adult there to play the games with her, especially since Rachel usually ended up helping run activities rather than participating in them. Derek showed up at the festival dressed casually in jeans and a sweatshirt, carrying a bag of tokens he had purchased at the entrance. He introduced himself to Emma simply as Derek, a friend of her mother's, not trying to position himself as anything more than that. Emma, who had been protective and skeptical of any man showing interest in her mother ever since Michael died, watched Derek carefully throughout the afternoon. She noticed that he didn't try too hard to be cool or fun, didn't talk down to her like she was a little kid, didn't ignore her to focus only on Rachel. He played carnival games with her, cheering when she won a stuffed animal at the ring toss, commiserating when she lost at the duck pond. He asked her about soccer, demonstrating actual knowledge of the sport by discussing recent World Cup matches and asking intelligent questions about her position and playing style. He talked about his daughter Jessica, making Emma feel like he understood what it was like to be a girl with interests and opinions and a life beyond just being someone's daughter. When the festival ended, Emma told Rachel privately that Derek seemed okay, which coming from a protective 12-year-old was high praise and subtle permission to continue seeing him. Derek integrated himself into Rachel's life slowly and naturally over the following weeks, always respectful of boundaries, but increasingly present in ways that felt comfortable rather than intrusive. He started attending the same church that Rachel and Emma went to every Sunday, sitting in the back pew with other individuals and couples, participating in services, but never making a fuss or drawing attention to himself. When Rachel mentioned after service one Sunday that she volunteered with the church's food pantry program. Derek started showing up to help sort donations and pack boxes. When Emma's soccer team's regular coach had a family emergency in mid-November and couldn't fulfill his commitment for the rest of the season, Derek volunteered to step in, spending Saturday mornings running drills and encouraging the girls without ever being inappropriate or overbearing. He treated Emma exactly the same as the other girls on the team, didn't give her special attention or try to use coaching as a way to bond with her, just focused on helping all the girls improve their skills and have fun. He helped Rachel's elderly neighbor fix a broken fence in late November, spending an entire Saturday afternoon repairing posts and replacing boards, refusing to accept payment or even compensation for materials. When Rachel caught a cold in early December and had to miss 2 days of work, Derek appeared at her apartment with homemade chicken soup, cold medicine, and a stack of magazines, leaving everything on the doorstep with a note saying he hoped she felt better soon. He sent flowers to her classroom on her birthday, with a card that said simply, "Happy birthday from a friend who appreciates all the good you do." A gesture that touched Rachel deeply because it acknowledged her work rather than focusing only on her appearance or their relationship. By December, Rachel realized she had feelings for Derek that went beyond friendship. He was everything Michael had been: kind, stable, thoughtful, present. But he was also his own person, with his own interests and perspectives and way of being in the world. He never forgot to text good morning, usually with a funny observation about something he had seen on his run, or a news story he thought Rachel would find interesting. He never cancelled plans at the last minute, always arriving when he said he would, and staying as long as he said he could. He never made promises he couldn't keep, never overpromised and underdelivered, never said things just to make Rachel feel good in the moment. When they finally kissed for the first time on Christmas Eve in Rachel's driveway, after he dropped her off from the church's candlelight service, it felt natural and right and terrifying all at once. Rachel went inside and cried, not because she was sad, but because she felt guilty for moving on from Michael, for allowing herself to feel happy again, for giving her heart to someone new. She felt like she was betraying Michael's memory by falling in love with another man. She felt like she was being disloyal to the 15 years they had spent together. She felt like she was abandoning her identity as Michael's wife, which had been such a core part of who she was for so long. But she also felt alive in a way she hadn't since Michael died, excited about the future instead of just surviving the present, open to possibilities she had thought were closed to her forever. Derek proposed on Valentine's Day, 2019 at Riverside Cafe, the same place where they had their first date 4 months earlier. He had arranged with the cafe owner to reserve their usual corner table, decorating it simply with a small vase of white roses and 2 candles. When Rachel arrived, nervous because Derek had made it clear this was a special occasion, but hadn't explained what made it special, she found him waiting at the table looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. He didn't make a public spectacle of the proposal, didn't hire photographers or organize a flash mob, or put it on social media. He simply got down on one knee at their regular corner table, pulled out a simple gold band with a small diamond, and asked Rachel if she would marry him. He told her he knew it was fast, that they had only known each other for 5 months, that he understood if she needed time to think about it, or if the answer was no. But he said he had never been more certain of anything in his life. He loved her. He loved Emma. He wanted to build a life together, to be a partner to Rachel and a positive presence in Emma's life, to create a family built on mutual respect and genuine affection. He said he didn't expect to replace Michael, that he knew Michael would always be Emma's father and always be part of Rachel's history, that he wasn't asking Rachel to forget her past, but to consider building a future with him. Rachel said yes. They were married 6 weeks later, on March 30th, 2019, in a small ceremony at Riverside Community Church. where they had been attending services together since November. Rachel wore a simple cream-colored dress she found at Nordstrom, elegant but understated, appropriate for a second marriage for a woman in her late 30s. Emma was the maid of honor, wearing a purple dress she picked out herself, holding Rachel's bouquet and standing beside her mother with a mixture of happiness and protectiveness that made Rachel's heart ache with love. Derek wore a dark gray suit and seemed genuinely emotional during the vows, his voice breaking when he promised to love and honor Rachel for the rest of his life. His eyes bright with what looked like tears when he slipped the wedding band onto her finger. About 50 people attended the ceremony. Rachel's sister Jennifer and her husband and 3 kids, colleagues from Lincoln Elementary, including Rachel's closest friend and fellow third-grade teacher Margaret Torres, neighbors from their street who had watched Emma grow up, friends from church who had gotten to know Derek over the past few months, Rachel's principal and several other staff members, and a few of Derek's work associates from the commercial real estate firm. Derek explained that most of his family was on the East Coast and couldn't make the trip on short notice, that his daughter Jessica was in the middle of midterm exams at Berkeley and felt terrible about missing it, but would visit over the summer. Everything seemed normal, believable, reasonable. After the ceremony, they had a small reception at Seasons Restaurant, a local favorite known for its Pacific Northwest cuisine and views of the Willamette River. Derek gave a toast thanking everyone for coming on relatively short notice, thanking Rachel for giving him a second chance at happiness after his divorce, thanking Emma for welcoming him into her family, promising to be the husband Rachel deserved and the father figure Emma needed. People clinked glasses, ate salmon and roasted vegetables and wedding cake from a local bakery, danced to music from a Spotify playlist that included songs from both the 1980s, when Derek would have been young, and the 2000s when Rachel and Michael had been dating and then married. Rachel's sister Jennifer pulled her aside at one point and said she was genuinely happy for her, that Derek seemed like a truly good man, that Michael would want Rachel to be happy again and would approve of someone who treated her so well. Rachel cried and hugged her sister and felt, for the first time in years, like her life was moving forward instead of just continuing in the same patterns of work and parenting and quiet grief. The original plan was to wait a few months before taking a honeymoon, to give Rachel time to arrange for a substitute teacher at school since it was the middle of the school year, and to make sure Emma was comfortable staying with Jennifer and her family for an extended period. But Derek surprised Rachel 2 weeks after the wedding with plane tickets to Costa Rica for the last week of April. He had already arranged everything, booked a beautiful resort in Manuel Antonio, gotten approval from Rachel's principal for the time off by finding and vetting a qualified substitute teacher, coordinated with Jennifer to have Emma stay with them during spring break week, which aligned perfectly with the trip dates, even gotten Emma's input on the trip to make sure she felt included in the decision and didn't feel abandoned or pushed aside by the new marriage. It was thoughtful, organized, romantic. Rachel felt overwhelmed by how lucky she was to have found someone who cared so much about doing things right, who thought about every detail, who made sure everyone involved was comfortable and informed. They flew out of Portland on April 22, 2019. Rachel had never been to Costa Rica, had never been anywhere particularly exotic except for a trip to Cancun for her and Michael's 10th anniversary 7 years ago. She was excited but nervous, worried about leaving Emma even though Emma had stayed with Jennifer many times before, worried about being away from her students in the last months of the school year, even though the substitute teacher seemed very qualified, worried about all the small anxieties that had defined her life since becoming a widow and single mother. Derek held her hand during the flight, reassured her that Emma would be fine with Jennifer's family who loved her like their own daughter, that her students would be fine with a substitute for 1 week, that sometimes it was okay to do something just for yourself without feeling guilty about it. Rachel relaxed, let herself believe that this trip would be the beginning of a new chapter in her life, a chance to finally let go of the past and fully commit to the future. They landed in San Jose, Costa Rica, on the evening of April 22nd at 7:15 p.m. local time. Derek had rented a car, a white Toyota RAV4 that he said would be good for the mountain roads they would be driving on to get to Manuel Antonio. The drive took about 3 hours through winding roads that climbed into mountains before descending toward the Pacific coast. Rachel took pictures on her phone of the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, of the lush green landscape so different from Portland's urban environment, of Derek driving with one hand on the wheel and one hand holding hers. She texted Emma to let her know they had arrived safely and were heading to the resort. She texted Jennifer a picture of the view from the highway with a caption that said, "Can you believe this is real? So beautiful." She posted a photo on Facebook of her and Derek at the airport with the caption, "Honeymoon bound, feeling blessed," with several heart emojis. She seemed happy. She seemed safe. She seemed unaware that in exactly 72 hours, she would be dead. The resort in Manuel Antonio was everything the website had promised and more. Vista del Pacifico Resort was a small luxury property with only 30 rooms, each with a private balcony, ocean views, and tasteful tropical decor. Their room was on the 3rd floor, with a view of the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly toward the horizon. A king-size bed with white linens and decorative pillows, a balcony with 2 chairs, and a small table perfect for morning coffee, and a bathroom with a rainfall shower and luxury amenities. Derek carried their suitcases inside, tipped the bellhop $20, and immediately suggested they go down to the hotel restaurant for dinner, since they hadn't eaten since the plane, and it was now after 10 p.m. They changed into casual clothes and walked hand in hand down to the open-air restaurant that overlooked the beach. The sound of waves crashing against the shore provided a constant backdrop to the soft music, playing through speakers hidden in the tropical plants that surrounded the dining area. They ordered fish tacos and mango margaritas, toasting to their marriage and their honeymoon and their future together. They talked about their plans for the week: a zip-lining tour through the rainforest canopy, a visit to Manuel Antonio National Park to see sloths and monkeys and other wildlife, a sunset catamaran cruise with dolphin watching, maybe a cooking class to learn how to make traditional Costa Rican dishes, definitely several days of just relaxing on the beach with books and drinks and no schedule at all. Derek seemed excited about all of it, pulling up information on his phone about different tours and activities, reading reviews out loud, asking Rachel what sounded most interesting to her. He showed her photos of the national park, pointing out the trails they could hike and the beaches where they could swim. He found a cooking class taught by a local chef that had excellent reviews and suggested they book it for later in the week. He looked up the zip-lining tour and showed Rachel videos of what to expect, assuring her that it was very safe and that she would love the views of the rainforest from above. Everything felt perfect, romantic, exactly what a honeymoon should be. After dinner, they walked on the beach despite the late hour, taking off their shoes and feeling the sand between their toes, listening to the waves in the darkness. It was dark except for the lights from the hotel behind them, and the moon reflecting off the water in a silvery path that seemed to lead to infinity. Derek stopped at one point, pulled Rachel close, and told her he loved her more than he ever thought possible. He said he knew their relationship had moved fast, but that sometimes you just know when something is right, when someone is meant to be in your life. He said he wanted to spend the rest of his life making her happy, being the partner she deserved, showing her every day how much he valued her. Rachel kissed him and thought about how different her life looked now compared to a year ago, when she was alone and grieving and convinced she would never feel whole again. She fell asleep that night in Derek's arms, listening to the sound of the ocean through the open balcony door, feeling genuinely content and hopeful for the first time since Michael died. The next day, April 23rd, was perfect in the way that honeymoon days are supposed to be perfect. The kind of day that exists in memory as a string of small, perfect moments, rather than a continuous narrative. They slept late, waking up at 9:30 a.m. to sunshine streaming through the balcony doors and the sound of tropical birds chattering in the trees outside. They ordered room service breakfast. Fresh fruit, scrambled eggs, bacon, toast with local jam, and Costa Rican coffee that was stronger and more flavorful than anything Rachel had ever tasted. They ate on the balcony, watching other resort guests beginning their days, some heading to the beach with towels and books, others leaving for tours and excursions. They spent the morning at the beach, finding 2 lounge chairs under a palm tree, where they alternated between reading, swimming in the warm ocean water, and dozing in the sun. Rachel read a thriller she had been saving for vacation, while Derek read a biography of Theodore Roosevelt. They swam together, floating in the gentle waves, pointing out tropical fish they could see in the clear water. Derek bought them coconut drinks from a vendor on the beach, and they laughed when Rachel couldn't figure out the right angle to drink from without spilling. Around 1 p.m., they walked into town for lunch at a small restaurant Derek had researched online. A casual place called Soda Tropical, where they ordered casados, traditional Costa Rican lunch plates with rice, beans, plantains, salad, and their choice of meat or fish. After lunch, they went back to the hotel for a nap, both tired from travel and sun, and the general exhaustion that comes from being completely relaxed. They slept for 2 hours, waking up in time to shower and get ready for the sunset catamaran cruise that Derek had booked for 5 p.m. The cruise left from the marina in Quepos, about a 15-minute drive from their hotel. Derek drove the rental car, and Rachel took more pictures of the Costa Rican landscape, the colorful buildings, the local people going about their daily lives, the mountains rising green and lush in the distance. The catamaran cruise was magical. There were about 20 other tourists on the boat, mostly couples in their 30s and 40s, a few families with older children. The crew welcomed everyone aboard, offering drinks from a cooler filled with beer, wine, sodas, and water. They motored away from the dock and then raised the sails, cutting the engine so the only sound was the wind and the water and the conversations of passengers taking in the beauty of the Costa Rican coastline from the water. Rachel and Derek sat at the front of the boat, holding hands while the crew pointed out landmarks along the shore and explained facts about local wildlife and ecology. Within 20 minutes of leaving the dock, they saw their first dolphins, a pod of about 8 animals playing in the waves, jumping and spinning and seeming to race alongside the boat. Everyone on the catamaran rushed to that side, phones and cameras out, excited voices overlapping as people tried to capture the moment. The sun began setting around 6:15 p.m., painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple that Rachel had only seen in heavily edited photos and thought couldn't possibly be real. But here it was, this impossible sunset, reflected in the ocean so that the boat seemed to be sailing through colored light. The crew served appetizers, small bites of local cheese and fruit and empanadas, while passengers stood on the deck taking photos and watching the sun slowly sink toward the horizon. Rachel took dozens of photos, some of just the sunset, some of Derek silhouetted against the colorful sky, some selfies of both of them smiling with the sunset behind them. Derek appeared in several of them, looking relaxed and happy, his arm around Rachel's shoulders, his face turned toward her rather than the camera in some shots, clearly more interested in her reaction to the sunset than the sunset itself. Later, investigators would study these photos looking for anything unusual, any sign of what was to come, but they found nothing. Derek looked like every other husband on every other honeymoon, happy to be there, in love with his wife. They returned to the marina around 7:30 p.m. as the last light faded from the sky. Derek drove them back to the hotel, and they discussed dinner options. They were both tired from the day and still full from the appetizers on the cruise, so they decided to skip a formal dinner and just get light snacks from the hotel bar. They sat at a small table on the terrace overlooking the ocean, ordering nachos and more drinks, talking about how perfect the day had been. Derek suggested they just relax at the hotel the next day, maybe do the zip-lining tour the following day instead, give themselves time to adjust to vacation mode without rushing from one activity to another. Rachel agreed, looking forward to a lazy day of reading and swimming and napping. But then Derek mentioned a restaurant he had read about for the following evening, a local place away from the tourist area that supposedly had the best ceviche in Costa Rica. He showed Rachel the reviews on his phone, reading some of them out loud, explaining that the restaurant was family-run and had been in the same location for 30 years. He said it would be an adventure to eat somewhere that locals went, rather than just sticking to tourist restaurants in the resort area. Rachel, who loved trying new foods and had enjoyed their lunch at the casual restaurant in town, thought it sounded perfect. Derek said he would make a reservation for 7 p.m. the following evening, April 24th, the meal that would be Rachel's last. The next morning, April 24th, they slept even later, not waking up until almost 11 a.m. They had room service breakfast again, this time eating inside because the morning sun was too hot on the balcony. They spent the afternoon exactly as planned, doing nothing in particular, just being together. Rachel posted more photos on Facebook and Instagram, showing her followers the beautiful resort, the gorgeous beach, the tropical drinks. Her last Instagram post was a photo of ceviche and plantains with the caption, "When in Costa Rica," followed by several food emojis. It was posted at 8:47 p.m. on April 24th. By the time anyone saw it the next morning, Rachel was already dead. The evening of April 24th began exactly as planned. Derek and Rachel got ready for dinner around 6 p.m., both showering and changing into casual but nice clothes. Rachel wore a blue sundress and sandals, simple gold earrings that Michael had given her for an anniversary years ago, and the emerald ring from her grandmother on her right hand. She packed a small purse with her phone, some cash, her ID, and lip gloss. They left the hotel around 6:30 p.m. in their rental car, with Derek driving and Rachel navigating using Google Maps on her phone. The restaurant, El Pacifico, was about 20 minutes away in a more residential area, not far from the marina where they had started the catamaran cruise. They arrived at the restaurant around 6:50 p.m. and immediately understood why locals loved it. El Pacifico was small and casual, with plastic chairs and handwritten menus, but it was packed with Costa Rican families and couples, always a good sign. The owner, a woman in her 50s named Maria, greeted them warmly in Spanish and gestured to an open table near the back. Derek and Rachel studied the menu, pointing at pictures since the descriptions were in Spanish, and Derek ordered for both of them using the few Spanish phrases he knew: ceviche, plantains, rice and beans, cold beer. The food arrived quickly and was delicious, exactly the kind of authentic local meal they had been hoping for. They talked and laughed and took photos of their food and the casual atmosphere. Rachel posted the last photo to Instagram at 8:47 p.m. After dinner, around 9 p.m., Derek suggested they walk around the neighborhood for a bit, before calling a taxi back to the hotel. Rachel agreed, assuming they would just stroll for a few minutes to help digest the large meal, and then head back to the resort. But Derek led them away from the restaurant, down streets that became progressively quieter and darker, away from the main roads, into residential areas where houses sat behind chain-link fences and streetlights were infrequent. Rachel started to feel uncomfortable, that sense of unease that women learn to trust but often talk themselves out of because they don't want to seem paranoid or rude. She asked Derek where they were going. He said there was a small park nearby that supposedly had a beautiful view of the ocean at night. that he had read about it online and wanted to check it out. Rachel trusted him. Why wouldn't she? This was her husband, the man who had spent 5 months proving himself to be kind and reliable and safe, who had integrated himself into her life and Emma's life so carefully and thoughtfully, who had done everything right. They turned down a street that was barely lit, lined with small houses behind chain-link fences. Rachel could hear dogs barking in the distance. She was about to suggest they head back when Derek stopped walking and turned to face her. His expression had changed in a way that Rachel's brain initially couldn't process. The warmth was gone from his eyes. The gentle smile that had been so constant over the past 5 months was gone. He looked at her the way someone might look at a problem they needed to solve, clinical and detached, completely devoid of the affection he had shown her just moments ago in the restaurant. Rachel felt fear spike through her chest for the first time since meeting him, a primal warning system that screamed danger, even though her conscious mind was still trying to make sense of what was happening. "Derek," she said, her voice shaking. "Let's go back to the restaurant. I don't feel comfortable here." But Derek didn't move. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a syringe filled with clear liquid, holding it in his right hand like something completely normal, like a pen or a phone. Rachel's brain tried to make sense of what she was seeing. Was Derek diabetic? Had he mentioned that and she forgot? Was this insulin? But the look on his face told her this wasn't medicine for himself. This was something meant for her. She took a step backward, her body acting on instinct before her mind fully caught up. "Derek, what is that? What are you doing?" Derek didn't answer with words. He moved faster than Rachel would have thought possible, closing the distance between them in one quick step, grabbing her arm with his left hand while his right hand brought the syringe toward her neck. Rachel tried to scream, but Derek's hand clamped over her mouth before more than a small gasp escaped. She tried to fight, tried to claw at his face with her free hand, but he twisted her around and pinned her against a concrete wall, using his body weight to keep her immobile. She felt the sharp prick of the needle entering her neck, felt the cold sensation of liquid being injected into her body, felt her limbs becoming heavy and uncoordinated within seconds. She tried to stay conscious, tried to fight the darkness closing in around her vision, but whatever drug Derek had injected her with was powerful and fast-acting. The last thing Rachel Morrison remembered before losing consciousness was Derek's face inches from hers, close enough that she could see herself reflected in his eyes, his expression still completely detached and businesslike. He whispered something she would never forget, words that would haunt the nightmares of everyone who later learned about this moment. "I'm sorry, but this is just business, nothing personal." Then everything went black. When Rachel didn't return calls or texts from Emma and Jennifer over the next 2 days, they assumed she was just enjoying her honeymoon and had limited phone service in some remote area of Costa Rica, where they might have gone for a tour or adventure. Rachel had mentioned potentially doing some off-the-grid exploring, maybe visiting a remote beach or taking a jungle trek, so her sister and daughter weren't immediately concerned when messages went unanswered. Jennifer sent several texts. "Hope you're having an amazing time. And Emma wants to know if you've seen any sloths yet. And call when you get a chance, no rush." Emma sent messages too. "Mom, I got an A on my science project. And Aunt Jennifer is letting us stay up late watching movies. And miss you but having fun." None of the messages were delivered. Rachel's phone had been turned off or destroyed shortly after she lost consciousness, ensuring that it couldn't be tracked or used to establish a timeline of events. For 2 days, April 25th and 26th, Rachel Morrison was missing, while her family assumed she was just out of touch, enjoying her honeymoon, living her best life with her new husband. Derek, during this time, was busy with the work of murder, following a process he had refined over 15 years and 7 previous victims. a systematic approach to making people disappear that had worked flawlessly every time before. When Derek called Jennifer on April 27th at 6:30 a.m. Portland time, she was still asleep, her phone buzzing on the nightstand next to her bed. She saw Derek's name on the screen and felt a brief moment of confusion. Why would Derek be calling her instead of Rachel? Before a spike of fear shot through her. Something was wrong. She answered the phone with her heart already racing. Derek? Is everything okay? Is Rachel okay? What followed was a performance that Derek had practiced and perfected over many years. His voice was thick with emotion, breaking in places, heavy with what sounded like genuine grief. Jennifer, I'm so sorry. There's been an accident. A terrible accident. He paused and Jennifer heard what sounded like a sob. Rachel, we went hiking yesterday in Manuel Antonio National Park. She was taking photos near an edge and she slipped. I tried to grab her, but I couldn't reach her in time. She fell. Jennifer, she fell so far. The park rangers found her body at the bottom of the ravine. They said she died on impact. She didn't suffer. Jennifer's world collapsed in that moment. The words didn't make sense. Rachel was dead. Rachel had fallen. Rachel was supposed to be on her honeymoon, supposed to be happy, supposed to be safe. This couldn't be happening. Not again. Not after Michael. Not after Rachel had finally found happiness again. Jennifer heard herself making sounds. Not words exactly, just sounds of grief and shock and disbelief. Derek continued talking, his voice breaking at intervals that sounded completely genuine. I don't know what to do. I can't believe she's gone. One minute we were looking at the view and the next minute she was gone. I've been at the hospital, dealing with Costa Rican authorities, trying to arrange everything. I need your help telling Emma. I can't bear to break that little girl's heart. I don't know how to tell her that her mother is never coming home. Jennifer was too shocked to ask many questions, too focused on how to tell Emma that her mother, the only parent she had left, was dead. She was too overwhelmed by grief to notice the inconsistencies in Derek's story, the lack of specific details about exactly where in the park this happened, the strange calmness in his voice once he got past the initial emotional delivery, the way he had already talked to hospital staff and authorities and made arrangements without contacting family first. She asked through her tears when Rachel's body would be returned to Portland for burial. Derek said that Costa Rican law required local cremation in cases of accidental death to prevent disease, especially given the condition of the body after the fall from such a height. He said Rachel's ashes would be returned within a week, that he would handle all the paperwork and arrangements, that Jennifer just needed to focus on Emma and break the news as gently as possible. Jennifer, who knew nothing about Costa Rican law or international death procedures, accepted this as true. Why wouldn't she? Derek was Rachel's husband. He was there dealing with the aftermath of tragedy. He had no reason to lie about any of this. She hung up the phone and sat on the edge of her bed, trying to figure out how to tell her 12-year-old niece that the second parent was dead, that Emma would now be an orphan, that the universe was cruel enough to take both of the girl's parents before she even finished middle school. Derek returned to Portland on April 28th, 6 days after he and Rachel had left for their honeymoon. He brought with him a small wooden urn that he said contained Rachel's ashes, purchased from a funeral home in Costa Rica. He brought a death certificate written in Spanish with official-looking stamps and signatures, printed on thick paper that seemed legitimate. He seemed genuinely devastated by grief, moving slowly like someone in shock, his eyes red and swollen like he had been crying for days. He wore dark clothes and spoke in a quiet voice. He hugged Emma when he saw her, holding the girl while she sobbed, telling her how sorry he was, how much her mother had loved her, how they would get through this together. He attended the memorial service that Rachel's friends and colleagues from Lincoln Elementary organized for the following week. standing quietly in the back of the church during the ceremony, accepting condolences with humble gratitude, never drawing attention to himself, just being present in his grief. Margaret Torres, Rachel's fellow teacher and close friend, gave a eulogy describing Rachel as the kind of teacher and friend and mother who made everyone around her better, who found joy in small moments, who loved deeply and completely. Rachel's principal talked about her dedication to students and her talent for making learning fun. Jennifer read a letter Emma had written to her mother, a heartbreaking collection of memories and things Emma wished she could still tell her mom. Derek sat in the back pew with tears running down his face, and everyone who saw him assumed he was a man destroyed by the sudden loss of the woman he loved. In the days following the memorial service, Derek helped Jennifer sort through Rachel's belongings in the apartment, packing up clothes to donate to charity, organizing documents and photos, making decisions about what Emma might want to keep and what could be discarded. He was helpful and practical, approaching the task with the same quiet efficiency he had shown in integrating himself into Rachel's life. He boxed up Rachel's teaching materials to be returned to the school. He organized her books into groups, some for Emma, some to donate to the library, some to give to friends who might want them. He carefully packed her jewelry into a wooden box, setting it aside to give to Emma when she was older. It was Emma who first noticed something wrong, who saw what the adults around her had missed because they were too consumed by grief to notice inconsistencies. She was in Derek's bedroom, which used to be her mother's bedroom, looking for a photo album she remembered her mother keeping in the closet. The photo album contained pictures from Emma's childhood, memories Emma desperately wanted to see, proof that her mother had existed and loved her and documented their life together. She found the album on a shelf in the closet, but she also found something else that made her stomach drop with a feeling she couldn't quite name. Sitting on the same shelf, clearly visible, was a small wooden jewelry box that definitely belonged to her mother. Emma recognized it immediately because her mother had shown it to her many times, explaining that it had belonged to Emma's great-grandmother and would one day belong to Emma. Emma opened the jewelry box with shaking hands. Inside was her grandmother's emerald ring, the one that had been passed down through generations, the one her mother wore on special occasions. Inside was her mother's wedding band from her marriage to Michael, Emma's father, the ring Rachel had stopped wearing when she married Derek but kept in this box. Inside were a pair of diamond earrings that Michael had given Rachel for their 15th anniversary. Earrings Emma had helped pick out even though she was only 5 years old at the time. Inside were several other pieces: a pearl necklace, a gold bracelet, a silver brooch shaped like a butterfly. Emma knew her mother had taken most of her jewelry with her to Costa Rica. She remembered specifically seeing her mother pack the emerald ring because Rachel had mentioned wanting to wear it to a nice dinner. So why was all her jewelry here in Derek's bedroom, in this apartment in Portland, when it should have been in Costa Rica, either lost in the fall that killed her mother or returned with her ashes? Emma stood in the closet holding the jewelry box, her mind trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Maybe her mom had changed her mind at the last minute and decided not to bring the jewelry after all. Maybe she had been worried about it getting lost or stolen from the hotel room. Maybe this made perfect sense, and Emma was just looking for problems because she was angry at the universe for taking her mother. But something felt wrong in a way Emma couldn't articulate, a feeling in her gut that told her this wasn't right. She brought the jewelry box to Jennifer, interrupting her aunt who was in the kitchen preparing lunch. "Aunt Jennifer," Emma said, her voice small and uncertain, "look what I found in Derek's closet." Jennifer looked at the jewelry box, recognized it immediately as Rachel's, remembered seeing it on Rachel's dresser for years. She opened it and saw all the pieces Emma had already inventoried, all the jewelry Rachel should have had with her in Costa Rica. Jennifer felt something cold and uncomfortable settle in her stomach, a feeling that made her pause in the middle of making sandwiches, a sensation she had learned over years of parenting to never ignore. She called Derek, who was at his apartment handling his own arrangements, packing up his life to prepare for whatever came next. "Derek," Jennifer said, trying to keep her voice neutral and friendly. "I have a question about Rachel's jewelry. Emma found her jewelry box in your closet, and all her important pieces are in it. I thought Rachel took most of her jewelry to Costa Rica." There was a pause on the other end of the line, so brief that Jennifer might have imagined it, before Derek responded smoothly and confidently. "Oh, that," he said, his voice carrying a tone of slight amusement, like Jennifer was worrying about nothing. "Rachel actually decided not to bring most of her jewelry at the last minute. She was worried about losing it or having it stolen from the hotel room. You know how she was about those pieces, especially her grandmother's ring. She didn't want to risk anything happening to them." The explanation made sense. Rachel had been careful with her jewelry, especially the pieces with sentimental value. She had been known to change her mind about what to bring on trips, overthinking and repacking multiple times. Jennifer wanted to believe Derek's explanation, wanted everything to make sense, wanted Rachel's death to be just a horrible accident and nothing more sinister. But then, Jennifer noticed something when Derek came over later that afternoon to drop off more of Rachel's belongings that he had finished sorting. He was wearing a chain around his neck that Jennifer had never seen before, a thin gold chain that caught the light when he moved. It was visible above the collar of his dark shirt, resting against his throat. Jennifer asked casually to see it, trying to keep her tone light and curious rather than suspicious. Derek hesitated for just a fraction of a second, a pause so brief that Jennifer might not have noticed if she hadn't been paying close attention. Then he pulled the chain out from under his shirt. Hanging from it was a ring. Not just any ring. Rachel's grandmother's emerald ring, the one that should have been in the jewelry box in the closet, the one Emma had found less than 4 hours ago. Jennifer stared at the ring, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. "Derek," she said slowly, "why are you wearing Rachel's emerald ring, the ring that's supposed to be in the jewelry box?" Derek's explanation came quickly, practiced and smooth. "I found this ring in my suitcase after returning from Costa Rica," he said, tucking the chain back under his shirt. "Rachel must have packed it at the last minute without telling me. I know she decided not to bring most of her jewelry, but I guess she changed her mind about this one piece. I've been wearing it to feel close to her. Grief makes you do strange things. I hope it's not inappropriate. I just miss her so much." But Jennifer noticed something else when Derek moved to tuck the chain away. Something she saw only because she was now looking for inconsistencies instead of accepting everything at face value. Derek was wearing another ring on his pinky finger, a plain gold band that looked familiar in a way that made Jennifer's heart start pounding. She asked to see his hand, reaching out before Derek could refuse or hide it. The ring on his pinky finger was engraved on the inside with initials and a date, MLM plus RLM, 6/15/2002. Michael Lewis Morrison and Rachel Lynn Morrison, their wedding date. It was Rachel's wedding band from her marriage to Michael, Emma's father. Derek was wearing Rachel's dead husband's wedding ring on his pinky finger like it was his own. Jennifer pulled her hand back like she had been burned. "Why?" she asked, her voice shaking now. "Why would you wear Rachel's wedding ring from Michael? Why would you wear a ring from her first marriage?" Derek's friendly expression faltered for the first time since Jennifer had known him. He became slightly defensive, his jaw tightening, his eyes hardening. He said grief made people do strange things, that he just wanted to feel connected to Rachel in any way possible, that he was wearing jewelry that reminded him of her because it brought him comfort in a dark time. He asked why Jennifer was questioning him when they should be supporting each other through this tragedy, when they both loved Rachel and both missed her, and should be united in grief rather than interrogating each other. But Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. She asked to see Rachel's death certificate. Derek said it was with his lawyer, being processed with other documents. She asked for contact information for the Costa Rican authorities who had handled Rachel's case. Derek said he had lost the paperwork in his grief, but would find it and send it to her. She asked if he had any photos from the honeymoon after the first 2 days, any documentation of where they had gone or what they had done. Derek said his phone had been damaged during the hiking accident when he tried to climb down to reach Rachel, and he had lost all the photos he had taken. Every answer raised more questions. Every explanation felt slightly off, reasonable enough to be plausible, but strange enough to create doubt. Jennifer made a decision that night after Derek left. She would verify the story herself. She contacted the American Embassy in Costa Rica through their website and asked for information about Rachel Morrison's death, providing Rachel's full name, birth date, and approximate date of death. The embassy responded within 2 days. They had no record of an American citizen named Rachel Morrison dying in Costa Rica in April 2019. They had no record of any American citizen dying in Manuel Antonio National Park during that time period. They suggested Jennifer contact local police in Manuel Antonio for more information, providing contact details. Jennifer contacted the Manuel Antonio Police Department through an email address provided by the embassy, using Google Translate to write her message in Spanish. She asked about hiking accidents in the national park, providing Rachel's name and the approximate date Derek had given for her death. The police responded in English, saying they had no record of any tourist death in the national park in April 2019, that all accidents resulting in death or serious injury were thoroughly documented and investigated, that they would certainly have records if such an incident had occurred. Jennifer's world shifted in that moment, the ground becoming unstable beneath her feet. If Rachel hadn't died in a hiking accident in Manuel Antonio National Park, then where had she died? How had she died? And why would Derek lie about it? Jennifer sat at her kitchen table with these questions circling in her mind, each one more terrifying than the last. She thought about Derek wearing Rachel's jewelry, about his smooth explanations that made sense individually, but created a disturbing pattern when viewed together, about how quickly he had returned from Costa Rica with ashes and a death certificate, about how he had handled everything without consulting Rachel's family or giving them a chance to be involved in the process. Jennifer picked up her phone and called the Portland Police Department. She asked to speak to someone about a possible murder. She was transferred to Detective Lisa Chen in the Homicide Division. Detective Chen listened while Jennifer explained everything. Rachel's honeymoon in Costa Rica, Derek's call reporting her death, the jewelry that should have been in Costa Rica but was in Portland, Derek wearing Rachel's rings, the lack of any record of Rachel's death with either the American Embassy or Costa Rican authorities. Detective Chen asked careful questions, took detailed notes, and told Jennifer she had done the right thing by calling. She said the police would investigate, that Jennifer should not confront Derek with her suspicions, that she should act normally while they looked into the situation. The Portland police contacted the FBI, who had jurisdiction over crimes involving American citizens abroad. The FBI contacted Interpol, who coordinated with Costa Rican authorities. Within 72 hours, an international investigation was underway. What they discovered would lead to one of the most extensive serial killer investigations in recent history, connecting cases across multiple states and spanning 15 years of systematic murder for profit. Costa Rican police, working with guidance from FBI agents, began reviewing security camera footage from the area where Derek said he and Rachel had stayed. They found footage from a camera at a gas station showing Derek Morrison checking into Vista del Pacifico Resort on April 22nd with a woman matching Rachel's description. They found footage from April 23rd showing Derek and Rachel leaving the resort together in the late evening. But they found no footage of either of them returning that night. Instead, they found footage from April 24th, showing Derek returning to the resort alone in the early morning hours, around 4 a.m., carrying what appeared to be a large duffel bag. He checked out of the resort on April 25th, 3 days early, declining housekeeping service for the days he had been there. Security footage from the restaurant where Derek and Rachel had dinner on the night of April 24th showed them arriving around 7 p.m., eating dinner, and leaving around 9 p.m., walking away from the restaurant toward a residential area. A private security camera on a nearby house captured footage that would prove crucial to the investigation. At 9:37 p.m. on April 24th, the camera showed Derek Morrison carrying an unconscious woman, positively identified as Rachel from her distinctive blue sundress and physical characteristics, to a vehicle parked on the street. The vehicle was a white Toyota RAV4, matching the rental car Derek had obtained at the airport. Derek placed Rachel in the back seat of the vehicle, covering her with what appeared to be a blanket, and drove away. Costa Rican police, with assistance from FBI forensic teams, tracked the vehicle's movements using traffic cameras and gas station footage. The RAV4 drove approximately 2 hours from Manuel Antonio to a remote area in the mountains, far from tourist destinations or populated areas. Police searched the area and found evidence of recent burial and exhumation at a location matching soil samples found in the vehicle when it was later recovered from the rental company. DNA testing on soil samples and trace evidence confirmed that Rachel Morrison had been buried in a shallow grave in this remote location while still alive but unconscious from the sedative Derek had injected her with. She had suffocated to death underground, unable to wake or call for help, her body shutting down as carbon dioxide levels in the makeshift grave exceeded what a human can survive. The forensic evidence suggested that Derek had returned to the site approximately 24 hours later, on the evening of April 25th, to exhume Rachel's body. He had then transported the remains to an even more remote location, where he used a portable cremation device, the kind that can be purchased online for thousands of dollars and is marketed for agricultural use or for people who want to cremate pets. He cremated Rachel's body over the course of several hours, reducing her remains to ash and bone fragments that he then placed in a wooden urn purchased from a funeral supply website. He created a fake death certificate using templates available online, adding official-looking stamps he had custom-made from a printing company. He returned to Portland with Rachel's ashes and the fake death certificate, presenting himself as a grieving widower while actually being Rachel's murderer. But this was only the beginning of what investigators would learn about Derek Morrison, whose real name, they soon discovered, was Alan Jeffrey Parker, age 52, born in Oakland, California, and wanted in connection with at least 6 other suspicious deaths of women across multiple states dating back 15 years. When FBI agents executed a search warrant on Derek Morrison's apartment in Portland on May 3, 2019, they found evidence that would break the case wide open and reveal the true scope of Alan Parker's crimes. In a storage unit rented under one of several fake names he used, agents found 6 additional wooden urns, each containing cremated human remains. They found 6 driver's licenses belonging to 6 different women, all between ages 30 and 45, all from different states. They found jewelry boxes containing hundreds of pieces of valuable jewelry, rings, necklaces, bracelets, earrings, each piece catalogued in a notebook with the name of the woman it had belonged to and an estimated value. They found life insurance policies, bank account information, property deeds, all in the names of different women. They found notebooks containing detailed information about each woman, their daily routines, their financial assets, their family situations, their vulnerabilities, their psychological profiles. One notebook in particular would prove crucial to understanding Alan Parker's systematic approach to murder. The notebook contained what could only be described as a business plan for serial killing, with each victim treated as a project with costs, benefits, and return on investment. Parker had rated each woman on various factors: ease of manipulation, asset value, family situation, risk of detection. He had documented his methods: how to establish false identities, how to integrate into communities, how to build trust over months, how to identify vulnerable women, how to create situations where they could be killed without witnesses, how to fake death certificates, how to cremate bodies and present ashes as legitimate remains. The notebook contained an entry about Rachel Morrison dated January 15, 2019, 3 months before her death, written in clinical detached language that made FBI agents physically sick to read. Subject RM has proven to be one of the easier acquisitions. Widowed status 3 years post-loss created optimal vulnerability window. Active presence of dependent daughter provides additional emotional leverage and urgency for subject to demonstrate life has returned to normal functioning. Subject demonstrates strong community ties which aid in legitimacy establishment, but creates minimal risk due to limited close family relationships. Asset value approximately $180,000 liquid savings and checking accounts, plus property equity, estimated $90,000 plus jewelry collection, estimated $20,000. Life insurance policy established post-marriage valued at $500,000 with subject's sister as contingent beneficiary can be modified post-marriage. Total estimated value $790,000 for approximately 5 months investment of time and minimal financial outlay. Excellent return on investment compared to previous acquisitions. Subject has shown complete trust, no suspicion of true identity or intent. Integration into subject's community has been successful. Church attendance, volunteer work, and youth coaching provide substantial legitimacy cover. Subject's daughter accepts presence, sister approves relationship, colleagues and neighbors view relationship positively. No concerning questions or background investigations detected. Execution planned for Costa Rica trip. Location selected for ease of body disposal and low probability of detailed investigation. Subject is trusting personality type and will not suspect danger until too late. Cremation will be straightforward, as subject has no close family aside from sister who has proven to not be naturally suspicious. Anticipate clean exit from Portland with assets liquidated and relocation to Seattle area by June 2019 to begin identification of next subject. FBI agents reading this entry realized they were dealing with a serial killer who approached murder not as an emotional crime, but as a business venture, complete with market research, cost-benefit analysis, and strategic planning. Alan Parker had been killing women for money for at least 15 years, possibly longer, systematically selecting victims based on their asset values and vulnerability factors, building elaborate false identities to gain their trust, marrying them to gain legal access to their finances, taking them to remote locations to murder them, and then returning to collect life insurance payouts and liquidate their assets before moving to a new city and starting the process over again. The investigation expanded rapidly as FBI teams in multiple states began connecting cold cases and suspicious deaths to Alan Parker. Using the information in his notebooks, agents were able to identify at least 6 previous victims, each with a similar pattern: vulnerable women, recent widow or divorce, assets in the range of $500,000 to $1.5 million, isolated from extended family, killed during trips to remote locations, bodies cremated, deaths attributed to accidents. The first identified victim was Patricia Romano, age 34, who died in Montana in 2004 while on her honeymoon with a man who called himself James Romano. Patricia had been a divorced mother of 2 boys, working as a dental hygienist in Billings. She had met James at a church singles group where he presented himself as a recently divorced insurance salesman rebuilding his life. Patricia's sister Carol had told police in 2004 that Patricia fell from a cliff while hiking in Glacier National Park, that James had returned devastated with her ashes and a death certificate from Montana authorities. But when FBI agents reviewed the case in 2019, they found that no death certificate had ever been filed with Montana vital records, that the document James Romano provided to Carol was a forgery, that there was no record of Patricia's death with park rangers or local police. Patricia's cremated remains were among the 6 urns found in Alan Parker's storage unit. DNA testing confirmed the ashes were Patricia Romano's. Alan Parker's notebook contained an entry about Patricia, describing her as his first successful application of the complete method he had been developing, noting that he had learned from mistakes in earlier attempts that had been too risky or hadn't yielded sufficient financial return. He estimated that he had gained approximately $400,000 from Patricia's life insurance policy, savings and jewelry, a sum that gave him the capital to invest more heavily in creating false identities for future victims. The second victim was Michelle Chen, age 41, who died on a camping trip in Utah in 2006. Michelle had been a widow living in Salt Lake City, working as a nurse practitioner, raising a teenage daughter alone. She had met a man who called himself David Chen at a grief support group, where he claimed to be processing the loss of his wife to breast cancer. They dated for 8 months before marrying in a small ceremony. Less than 2 weeks after the wedding, David suggested a camping trip to a remote area of southeastern Utah. Michelle never returned. David reported that she had been bitten by a rattlesnake while hiking, that she had died before they could reach medical help, that he had her body cremated in accordance with her wishes. Michelle's ashes were among those found in Parker's storage unit. His notebook described her as a high-value target with excellent assets and minimal family complications. The third victim was Karen Wells, age 38, who died on a beach vacation in Mexico in 2009. Karen had been divorced, working as a real estate agent in Phoenix, Arizona. She met a man who called himself Robert Wells at a professional networking event. He claimed to work in mortgage lending. They dated for 10 months before marrying. On their honeymoon in Puerto Vallarta, Karen allegedly drowned while swimming. Robert returned to Phoenix with her ashes, explaining that Mexican authorities required immediate cremation in cases of drowning deaths. Karen's ashes were in Parker's collection. His notebook noted that the Mexico location had worked well due to less rigorous death investigation protocols compared to the United States. The fourth victim was Sandra Price, age 36, who died on a cruise in the Caribbean in 2011. Sandra had been a widow living in Atlanta, Georgia, working as a financial analyst. She met a man who called himself Thomas Price through an online dating site designed for professionals. They dated for 7 months before marrying. During their honeymoon cruise, Sandra allegedly fell overboard during rough seas at night. The cruise line conducted a search but never recovered her body. Thomas Price told Sandra's family that the cruise line had provided documentation of her death and that he was handling the legal and financial aftermath. But Sandra Price's ashes were in Alan Parker's storage unit, meaning she had never actually fallen overboard. She had been killed somewhere on land, her body cremated, and the cruise story fabricated to explain her disappearance. Parker's notebook described the cruise scenario as high risk but successful, noting that he would not use that method again due to too many potential witnesses and complications. The fifth victim was Jennifer Boyd, age 43, who died on a wine country tour in California in 2014. Jennifer had been divorced, working as a marketing director in San Francisco. She met a man who called himself Christopher Boyd at a charity fundraiser for cancer research. He claimed to work in pharmaceutical sales. They dated for 9 months before marrying. During a weekend trip to Napa Valley, Jennifer allegedly died from a severe allergic reaction to something she ate at a restaurant. Christopher returned to San Francisco with her ashes, explaining that Napa County health regulations required immediate cremation in cases of severe anaphylaxis to prevent disease transmission. Jennifer's ashes were among those found by FBI agents. Parker's notebook described her as his highest value victim at that point, with assets totaling approximately $1.2 million, including her home in San Francisco, retirement accounts, and a trust fund from her parents. The sixth victim was Lisa Martinez, age 39, who died on a mountain retreat in Colorado in 2016. Lisa had been a widow living in Denver, working as a corporate attorney. She met a man who called himself Stephen Martinez at a continuing legal education conference. He claimed to be an attorney specializing in environmental law. They dated for 8 months before marrying. During a weekend at a remote mountain cabin that Stephen had rented, Lisa allegedly died from carbon monoxide poisoning due to a faulty heater. Stephen returned to Denver with her ashes, explaining that Colorado law required immediate cremation in cases of toxic exposure deaths. Lisa's ashes were in Parker's collection. His notebook described her as an ideal victim: successful, wealthy, isolated from family, professionally competent but emotionally vulnerable after the loss of her husband, eager for a second chance at happiness. And finally, Rachel Morrison, age 38, who died in Costa Rica in 2019. Rachel had been a widow living in Portland, Oregon, working as an elementary school teacher. She met a man who called himself Derek Morrison at a community fundraiser. He claimed to work in commercial real estate. They dated for 5 months before marrying. During their honeymoon in Costa Rica, Rachel was drugged, buried alive, and cremated. Derek Morrison, whose real name was Alan Parker, returned to Portland with her ashes and might have gotten away with it completely if not for a 12-year-old girl who noticed that her mother's jewelry was in the wrong place. 7 women, 15 years, estimated total value of assets stolen, $4.3 million. That was Alan Parker's legacy when he was arrested on May 3, 2019, at his apartment in Portland. FBI agents approached him as he was leaving to go to the gym, a normal Saturday morning activity for a man who appeared to have no concerns about being caught. He showed no emotion during the arrest, no surprise or fear or anger. He simply allowed himself to be handcuffed, read his Miranda rights, and taken into custody. When agents told him they had found the storage unit with the urns and the notebooks and all the evidence of his crimes, he showed no reaction at all, as if this information had no personal relevance to him whatsoever. During interrogation at FBI headquarters in Portland, Alan Parker waived his right to an attorney and agreed to talk to agents. Over the course of 12 hours, he described his methods in detail, speaking about the murders as if discussing a business operation rather than the deaths of 7 human beings. He explained how he had developed his system over many years, starting with less sophisticated approaches in his 20s and 30s, gradually refining his methods until they became nearly foolproof. He talked about how he selected victims based on detailed research of public records, social media presence, and community involvement. He described how he created false identities by obtaining birth certificates of deceased individuals who would have been approximately his age, using those birth certificates to obtain driver's licenses and social security numbers, building credit histories and employment records that could withstand background checks. He explained how he integrated into communities by identifying vulnerable women and then positioning himself in places where he would naturally encounter them: churches, volunteer organizations, grief support groups, professional networking events, charity fundraisers. He described how he studied each woman for weeks or months before making initial contact, learning their routines, their interests, their vulnerabilities, their family situations. He talked about how he built trust slowly over months of seemingly genuine friendship and romance, never rushing, never showing any sign of danger until the moment he decided to kill. When asked why he did it, Alan Parker gave an answer that horrified everyone who heard it. He said it was an efficient way to make money. He said that working a traditional job would have taken decades to accumulate the wealth he had gained in 15 years of killing. He said that targeting widows and divorcees with assets made logical sense because they were emotionally vulnerable and financially stable. He said that killing them during trips to remote locations minimized risk of detection. He said that cremating bodies eliminated forensic evidence. He said that his method had a nearly perfect success rate until Rachel Morrison, and the only reason he was caught then was random bad luck that a child noticed jewelry in a closet. When asked if he felt any guilt or remorse about the 7 women he killed or the children he left motherless, Alan Parker said he had never thought about it, that he didn't see the victims as real people, but as assets to be acquired, that their children would be resilient and would survive just as millions of other children survived the loss of parents. He compared what he did to a business transaction, saying that the women received a few months of companionship and attention before their deaths, so it wasn't as if they got nothing in return for what he took from them. He said it had been a mutually beneficial arrangement except for the ending, which he acknowledged was unfortunate but necessary. The trial of Alan Parker began in September 2020 and lasted 3 months. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: the notebooks documenting his plans, the jewelry and personal effects from all 7 victims, the cremated remains, the false identification documents, the financial records showing him accessing and liquidating the victims' assets, the testimony of family members who identified their loved ones' belongings, the forensic evidence from Costa Rica showing Rachel Morrison's burial and cremation, and Alan Parker's own confession describing every detail of his methodology. The defense attempted to argue that Alan Parker suffered from a personality disorder that prevented him from understanding the moral implications of his actions, that he genuinely believed he was engaging in business transactions rather than murder, that he should be found not guilty by reason of insanity. But the prosecution demonstrated that Parker had acted with clear premeditation and sophisticated planning, that he had taken extensive steps to avoid detection, including creating false identities and destroying evidence, that he had successfully maintained a normal appearance in multiple communities over many years, and that his own notebook showed he fully understood he was committing crimes and could be punished if caught. Families of all 7 victims attended the trial, sitting together in the courtroom, holding hands, supporting each other through the horrific details of how their loved ones had died. Emma Morrison, now 13 years old, attended portions of the trial with Jennifer. She read a victim impact statement during the sentencing phase, describing what it was like to lose her mother twice, once to death, and once to the realization that her death was not an accident, but a calculated murder by a man Emma had trusted, a man she had allowed into her life and her home, a man who had coached her soccer team and attended her school events and pretended to care about her while actually planning to kill her mother for money. Emma's statement reduced many in the courtroom to tears. She described how she had trusted Derek, how she had started to think of him as a potential father figure, how she had felt guilty after her mother's death for not being nicer to him or more welcoming. She described the moment she found the jewelry box and knew something was wrong, the feeling of her world collapsing when she realized her mother might have been murdered. She described the nightmares she still had, dreams where she tried to warn her mother not to go to Costa Rica, not to trust Derek, not to get on the plane. She described what it was like to be 13 years old and orphaned, living with her aunt and uncle and cousins who loved her but weren't her parents, going to therapy 3 times a week to deal with trauma and grief and anger, knowing that the person who killed her mother was still alive while her mother was gone forever. Jennifer testified about Rachel's kindness, her dedication to her students, her love for Emma, her desire to build a new life after the tragedy of Michael's death. She described Rachel as someone who made everyone around her better, who found joy in small moments, who loved deeply and completely, who deserved to grow old and watch her daughter graduate from high school and college, get married, have children. She described the pain of learning that Rachel's death was not an accident but murder, that the man Jennifer had welcomed into their family had been planning Rachel's death from the moment he met her. Margaret Torres, Rachel's fellow teacher and closest friend at Lincoln Elementary, testified about Rachel's impact on her students and colleagues. She described how Rachel had created a classroom environment where every student felt valued, how she had spent her own money on books and supplies because she believed all children deserved access to learning resources, how she had stayed late to tutor students who were struggling, how she had written personalized notes to each student on the last day of school every year. She described the hole Rachel's death had left in the school community, how students still talked about her years later, how her classroom had been turned into a memorial space where students could go to read or think. Carol Bennett, Patricia Romano's sister, testified about Patricia's life and the 15 years Carol had spent believing her sister died in a hiking accident. She described the devastation of learning in 2019 that Patricia had actually been murdered, that the man Carol had welcomed into Patricia's life and trusted to care for her sister had actually been planning her death all along. She described how Patricia's sons, now in their 20s, had struggled with reopening old wounds, learning that their mother's death was murder, dealing with rage and grief that had nowhere to go because they couldn't change what had happened. Family members of Michelle Chen, Karen Wells, Sandra Price, Jennifer Boyd, and Lisa Martinez all testified, creating a collective portrait of 7 women who had been more than Alan Parker's victims, who had been mothers and daughters and sisters and friends, who had careers and interests and dreams, who had survived loss and rebuilt their lives and dared to hope for happiness again, only to encounter a predator who saw them not as human beings, but as opportunities for profit. The most chilling testimony came from Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, a forensic psychologist who had evaluated Alan Parker at the request of the prosecution. Dr. Reeves testified that Parker met all the diagnostic criteria for antisocial personality disorder and psychopathy, specifically noting his complete lack of empathy, his view of other people as objects to be used, his sophisticated manipulation skills, his grandiose sense of self-worth, his lack of remorse or guilt, and his ability to maintain a facade of normalcy while engaging in predatory behavior. She explained that Parker was not insane in any legal sense, that he understood the difference between right and wrong, that he had acted with clear premeditation and planning, and that his methodical approach to murder demonstrated sophisticated reasoning skills. Dr. Reeves explained that predators like Parker often targeted vulnerable people not out of any emotional drive, but because vulnerability made targets easier to manipulate and control. She noted that Parker had specifically selected women who were in transition periods of their lives, widows and divorcees who were trying to rebuild after loss, women who wanted to believe in second chances and were therefore more likely to trust someone who presented himself as safe and stable and kind. She explained that Parker's ability to integrate into communities, to present himself as a helpful neighbor and dedicated volunteer and caring partner, was a common trait among sophisticated predators who understood that the best disguise was not to hide, but to become hyper-visible in positive ways. When asked if someone like Alan Parker could be rehabilitated, Dr. Reeves said no. She explained that antisocial personality disorder, especially when combined with psychopathy to the degree Parker demonstrated, was not treatable through therapy or medication. She said that people with this combination of traits saw other humans as things to be used, that they felt no authentic emotional connections to others. that they were fundamentally incapable of empathy or remorse. She said that the only thing that stopped people like Parker from committing more crimes was incapacitation, removing them from society permanently so they no longer had access to potential victims. Alan Parker sat through all of this testimony without visible emotion. When family members described their pain, he showed no reaction. When Emma read her victim impact statement, he stared at her with the same clinical detachment he had shown Rachel in those final moments before injecting her with sedative. When the jury was shown photos of the victims, happy photos from before they met him, photos of Rachel and Emma together, photos of Patricia with her sons, photos of the other 5 women living their lives before encountering a monster, Parker examined the photos as if looking at strangers in whom he had no interest. When given the opportunity to make a statement before sentencing, Alan Parker declined. He had nothing to say to the families of his victims, no apology to offer, no explanation beyond what he had already provided in his interrogation. He simply sat in his chair and waited for the judge to pronounce sentence. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 7 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of fraud, forgery, identity theft, and dozens of other charges. The judge sentenced Alan Parker to 7 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole, meaning he would die in prison, meaning he would never again be free to hurt anyone, never again able to prey on vulnerable women, never again able to wear his victims' jewelry as trophies. As he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs and leg shackles, one of the family members shouted, "You should burn the way you burned them." Alan Parker didn't react. He didn't turn his head or change his expression. He just shuffled out of the courtroom surrounded by federal marshals, disappearing into the prison system where he would spend the rest of his life. The aftermath of the Alan Parker case changed how law enforcement agencies across the country handle suspicious deaths and missing persons cases involving recently married couples. It led to new protocols requiring more thorough verification of death certificates from foreign countries, making it harder for criminals to fake international deaths. It prompted the State Department to create a system where all American citizen deaths abroad must be verified through the embassy before cremation or burial can occur. It led to recommendations that life insurance companies conduct more extensive background checks on recent spouses before paying out death benefits. Several states passed laws requiring longer waiting periods between marriage and the ability to change beneficiaries on life insurance policies, specifically to prevent predators like Parker from quickly marrying victims and immediately naming themselves as beneficiaries. Dating safety organizations developed new programs warning people about predators who use community integration and slow relationship building as manipulation tactics, emphasizing that danger doesn't always come from obvious places like online dating profiles of foreign strangers, but can come from the seemingly normal person sitting next to you in church or coaching your child's sports team. For Emma Morrison and the children of Alan Parker's 6 other victims, there was no happy ending, no justice that could bring their mothers back or erase the trauma of learning they died terrified and alone at the hands of someone they loved. Emma was raised by Jennifer and her family, graduated high school with honors in 2024, and is currently attending Portland State University, studying social work with a focus on victim advocacy. She speaks at victim rights events and law enforcement training sessions, telling Rachel's story not to gain sympathy, but to educate others about predatory behavior. She warns that danger doesn't always announce itself with obvious red flags, that evil doesn't always act evil, that someone can volunteer at church and coach soccer and bring donuts to fundraisers and still be a monster hiding in plain sight. Emma tells audiences to trust their instincts when something feels wrong, even if they can't articulate why. She encourages people to maintain connections with family and friends who can provide outside perspective on new relationships. She promotes background checks and reference verification, noting that even someone who seems perfect might be living under a false identity. She asks people to remember that her mother did nothing wrong, that Rachel Morrison was not foolish or naive or careless, that she was simply a kind woman who met a skilled predator who had spent 15 years perfecting his craft, and that anyone could have been fooled by someone that practiced at deception. Lincoln Elementary School created a memorial garden in Rachel's honor, a quiet space where students can sit and read and remember a teacher who believed every child deserved patience and encouragement. A bench in the garden has a plaque that reads, "In memory of Rachel Morrison, who taught us that kindness matters, that every student deserves to be seen, and that love should build us up, not tear us down." Every year on the anniversary of Rachel's death, current and former students gather at the memorial garden to share stories about how Rachel influenced their lives, keeping her memory alive as more than just a victim of a serial killer, but as a woman who lived with purpose and touched hundreds of lives through her work. Jennifer maintains relationships with the families of Alan Parker's other 6 victims. They form a small community of people bound by shared tragedy and shared determination to honor their loved ones' memories. They meet annually on a video call, sharing updates about their lives, supporting each other through difficult anniversaries and holidays, finding comfort in being with people who understand their specific grief. They have advocated successfully for legislative changes, making it harder for criminals to create fake identities and fake death certificates. They have worked with the FBI to develop training materials about long-term predatory behavior patterns that officers can use to identify similar cases. They have turned their private pain into public purpose, ensuring that Patricia, Michelle, Karen, Sandra, Jennifer, Lisa, and Rachel are remembered not just for how they died, but for how they lived. The emerald ring and wedding band that Alan Parker wore when he returned from Costa Rica were recovered and given to Emma. She keeps them in a safe deposit box, unable to wear them but unable to let them go, a reminder of her mother's life and the man who ended it. She sometimes wonders what Rachel would think about how her death exposed a serial killer, how her murder led to justice for 6 other families, how the investigation changed protocols that might save future lives. Would Rachel find meaning in that? Would she be glad that her death wasn't completely meaningless? Emma will never know. All she knows is that her mother went on a honeymoon, expecting to start a new chapter, and instead met a monster who saw her not as a person, but as a financial opportunity. Alan Parker remains in federal prison, serving his 7 consecutive life sentences. He will die there, never again free to manipulate another vulnerable woman, never again able to add to his collection of urns and jewelry and insurance policies. He has given no interviews, issued no statements, shown no remorse. He simply exists in prison, aging slowly, waiting to die, having taken 7 lives and destroyed dozens more through the ripple effects of his crimes. The story of Rachel Morrison is not a story with a satisfying ending. There is no resurrection of the dead, no undoing of the trauma inflicted on children who lost their mothers. But there is meaning in how Rachel's death was not the end of Alan Parker's killing spree, but the moment it finally stopped. How Emma's sharp observation and Jennifer's determination to verify inconsistencies led to an investigation that saved future lives. How 7 families finally got truth about what really happened to their loved ones. Rachel Morrison deserved to grow old with Emma, to see her daughter graduate and get married and have children, to continue teaching and making her community better through daily acts of kindness, to find genuine happiness with someone who truly loved her. She deserved a long life full of ordinary joys and small pleasures. She deserved to wake up every morning knowing she was safe, knowing the person sleeping beside her wanted to protect her rather than harm her. Instead, she got 72 hours of honeymoon before being drugged, buried alive, and cremated by a man who had never seen her as human at all. who had studied her for months like a scientist studies a specimen, who had documented her vulnerabilities in a notebook as if planning a business acquisition rather than a murder. But Rachel Morrison, even in death, matters. Her life mattered to her students who still remember the teacher who made them feel valued. Her life mattered to Emma, who carries forward her mother's legacy of kindness and determination. Her life mattered to her community, who lost someone who made ordinary days better through her presence. And her death mattered because it stopped Alan Parker, because it exposed his crimes, because it led to justice for 6 other families, because it changed policies that protect others. This is the story of an elementary school teacher from Portland, Oregon, who thought she had found love again after tragedy, who trusted a man who seemed kind and normal and safe, who died on her honeymoon, not knowing that her death would be the one that finally brought down a serial killer who had evaded justice for 15 years. This is the story of how a 12-year-old girl's observation about missing jewelry led to one of the most important serial killer captures in recent history. This is the story of how sometimes the smallest details solve the biggest cases, how sometimes justice comes from paying attention when something doesn't quite fit, how sometimes the courage to ask questions and demand truth can save lives. Rachel Morrison was killed because Alan Parker wanted her money, but she is remembered because of who she was as a person, as a teacher, as a mother, as a friend, as someone who made the world better through daily acts of kindness and compassion. Her legacy is not how she died, but how she lived, and how even in death she managed to save others by being the victim who finally exposed a monster who had been hiding among us all along, wearing the mask of normalcy, pretending to be one of us, using our own values of community and trust and second chances as weapons against us. The emerald ring that started this investigation, the ring that Alan Parker wore around his neck, thinking it was a trophy of another successful kill, became instead the evidence that destroyed him. Sometimes the smallest things matter most. Sometimes paying attention saves lives. Sometimes asking uncomfortable questions is the most important thing you can do. And sometimes a mother's love, even from beyond the grave, can still protect others through the careful observation of a daughter who knew something was wrong and refused to look away.